Is 1943. Somewhere over the Rhine, the sky is shaking. Hundreds of heavy bombers are pushing through the darkness, engines roaring at full power, each aircraft carrying thousands of pounds of high explosives toward the industrial heart of Germany. This is Bomber Command at its peak, the largest aerial offensive in human history. And if you know anything about this war, you know the engine that made it possible. The Rolls-Royce Merlin, the legendary V-12 that powered the Spitfire, the Hurricane, the Lancaster, the engine that saved Britain. Except that is not the whole story, not even close, because another British engine lifted more bombers into the sky than the Merlin ever did. It powered the Halifax, the workhorse of Bomber Command. It powered the Stirling, the first four-engine heavy bomber in RAF service. It powered the Wellington, the Beaufighter, and dozens of other aircraft that carried the war to the enemy every single night. That engine was the Bristol Hercules. Over 57,000 were built, and the man who created it, along with four other world-class engines before it, was a Bristol engineer named Roy Fedden. In January 1942, the King made him a knight. 9 months later, his own company forced him out the door. The man responsible for more than half of the RAF's engine power, gone. Rolls-Royce kept the glory. Fedden kept nothing. This is the story of how Britain's greatest aero-engine designer was destroyed not by the enemy, but by politics, jealousy, and a system that rewarded the wrong name. Roy Fedden was born on the 6th of June, 1885, in Bristol, a city that already had engines in its blood. His father was a civil engineer. The boy grew up surrounded by machines, drawings, and the smell of oil. He studied at Clifton College, then moved on to Bristol Merchant Venturers Technical College, where he learned not just theory, but how to build things with his own hands. In 1906, at just 21 years old, he joined a company called Brazil Straker, a small firm making cars and commercial vehicles. Within a year, he was their chief engineer, 22 years old, and already running the engine department, not because of connections or family money, but because he was simply better than everyone around him. Then the Great War changed everything. Brazil Straker shifted from cars to aircraft engines, and Fedden threw himself into the work. He designed a 14-cylinder radial engine, powerful, compact, and ahead of its time. The company reorganized under a new name, Cosmos Engineering, and Fedden became the driving force behind everything it produced. But Cosmos was a small company with big ambitions and not enough money. By 1920, it was bankrupt. The factory, the designs, the prototypes, all of it was bought by Bristol Aeroplane Company, one of the largest aircraft manufacturers in Britain. Fedden came with the deal, not as a guest, but as the new chief engineer of the entire engine division, and he did not come alone. With him came Leonard Butler, his draftsman, his closest collaborator, the man who turned Fedden's ideas into precise engineering drawings. Every component they designed together was stamped with two letters, F.B. Fedden and Butler. It was a partnership built on trust, precision, and a shared obsession with making engines that no one else could match. That partnership would last for over 20 years, and together they would change the course of British aviation. Fedden's first masterpiece at Bristol was the Jupiter, a 9-cylinder radial engine, air-cooled, producing between 400 and 580 horsepower. It does not sound revolutionary, but what happened next was, the Jupiter did not just power British aircraft, it powered the world's aircraft. 16 countries licensed the design, from France to Japan, from Sweden to the Soviet Union. 262 different types of aircraft flew on the Jupiter. Between 7,000 and 10,000 were built. This was not a niche engine for a single air force. This was the international standard of aviation in the 1920s. And Fedden was only getting started. In 1925 came the Bristol Mercury, a tighter, more powerful 9-cylinder radial, pushing up to 995 horsepower. Over 20,000 were built. It would go on to power the Blenheim bomber, the Gladiator fighter, and the Lysander, the aircraft that dropped secret agents behind enemy lines in occupied France. 2 years later, Fedden produced the Pegasus, a 9-cylinder engine delivering over 1,000 horsepower. Somewhere between 17,000 and 32,000, Pegasus engines rolled off the production line. They powered the Swordfish torpedo bomber, the biplane that crippled the Bismarck. They powered early marks of the Wellington. They lifted the massive Sunderland flying boats that hunted submarines across the Atlantic. By the end of the 1930s, Roy Fedden had designed 3 engines that together powered more types of aircraft than any other engineer in Britain. Tens of thousands of machines flying on his designs. In 1938, the Americans awarded him the Daniel Guggenheim Medal, the highest honor in world aviation. That same year, he became president of the Royal Aeronautical Society. He held the post again in 1939. America recognized his genius before his own country did, and the greatest chapter of his career had not even begun. But Fedden was not satisfied with building better versions of what already existed. He wanted something that nobody else had, something that the entire aviation industry said was impossible. To understand what he did, you need to understand how a piston engine breathes. In a conventional engine, each cylinder has valves, small metal discs on springs that open and close thousands of times per minute, letting fuel in and exhaust out. These valves get extremely hot. They warp, they burn, and they put a hard limit on how much pressure you can build inside the cylinder. More pressure means more power, but push the valves too hard, and the engine tears itself apart. Now imagine removing those valves entirely. Instead, you wrap the piston inside a thin metal sleeve, a cylinder within a cylinder, that slides up and down, rotating slightly as it moves. Cut ports into that sleeve, and at exactly the right moment, the ports line up with openings in the cylinder wall. Fuel rushes in, exhaust rushes out. No valves, no springs, no bottleneck. The sleeve does everything. This was the sleeve valve. It was invented in 1909 by 2 engineers, Peter Burt and James McCollum. The concept was elegant. The reality was a nightmare. No one could make it work reliably in an aircraft engine. The tolerances were too tight, the materials too weak, the lubrication problems unsolvable. Every major engine company in the world looked at the sleeve valve and walked away. Every company, except Bristol, because Roy Fedden saw what others could not. In 1925, Sir Harry Ricardo, the leading authority on engine combustion in the world, published research proving that the sleeve valve allowed a full point higher compression ratio than conventional valves. 5-to-1 became 6-to-1. That single point of compression meant dramatically more power from the same engine volume. Ricardo had shown the prize, but nobody knew how to reach it. Fedden decided he would be the one. What followed was over a decade of relentless, obsessive development. His team tested 58 different metal alloys. They ran over 1,100 heat treatment processes on sleeve materials, working with metallurgist A.E. Thornton and the specialists at Firth Vickers Steel. The sleeves cracked, they seized, they failed in ways nobody had predicted. Year after year, the problem seemed unsolvable. Then in March 1938 came the breakthrough. And it arrived entirely by accident. A factory worker was grinding a sleeve on a worn-out wheel. The wheel, being slightly uneven, produced a surface that was not perfectly round. It had a microscopic ovality of less than 1/1000th of an inch. And that tiny imperfection turned out to be exactly what the engine needed. It allowed just enough oil to cling to the surface, solving the lubrication problem that had defeated engineers for nearly 30 years. The total cost of development, £2 million, an enormous sum at the time. Years of failure, thousands of experiments, and in the end the answer came from a worn, grinding wheel and a stroke of luck. The aviation historian Bill Gunston would later write that Fedden was probably the only person on Earth who could have made the sleeve valve work in a production aero engine. Not because he was the smartest, but because he was the most stubborn. He simply refused to accept that it could not be done. And what he built with that technology would power an air war that nobody yet imagined was coming. Throughout the 1930s, while Fedden was perfecting his sleeve valve, he was also traveling. He visited Germany multiple times, touring factories, meeting engineers, observing what the new regime was building. And what he saw terrified him. The Germans were industrializing at a pace that Britain could not even comprehend. New aircraft factories were rising from nothing. Engine production lines were being built on a scale that dwarfed anything in the British Isles. Fedden came home and sounded the alarm. He warned anyone who would listen, the government, the Air Ministry, his own company, that a war was coming and that Britain was nowhere near ready for the industrial fight it would demand. They ignored him. He was told he was exaggerating. He was told to focus on his engines and leave politics to the politicians. But the real problem was not in Germany. The real problem was inside Britain itself, and it had two faces. The first was Rolls-Royce, not the engines, the politics. Ernest Hives, the managing director of Rolls-Royce, had a direct line to Air Chief Marshal Sir Wilfrid Freeman, the man who controlled aircraft procurement for the Royal Air Force. When Rolls-Royce needed resources, contracts, or priority, Hives picked up the phone and spoke to the most powerful man in British aviation purchasing. Bristol had no such connection. Bristol had the White family. 4 men, 2 brothers, 2 cousins, who sat on the board of directors and controlled the company. Not one of them was an engineer. They ran Bristol like a family estate, cautious, conservative, and deeply suspicious of anyone who might grow too powerful within their walls. In 1931, the British government itself recommended that Fedden be given a seat on the Bristol board, recognizing that the man who designed every single engine the company produced deserved a voice in how the company was run. The White family said no. The man who built the company's reputation was not welcome at the table where decisions were made, and there was something else working against Fedden, something even harder to fight than boardroom politics. It was a myth, and it began with a trophy. In 1929 and again in 1931, Britain won the Schneider Trophy, the most prestigious air racing competition in the world, using aircraft powered by Rolls-Royce inline engines. The victories were spectacular. They captured the public imagination, and they planted a belief deep inside the Air Ministry that would shape British aviation policy for the next decade. The belief that inline liquid-cooled engines like the Rolls-Royce Merlin represented the future, while air-cooled radials like Fedden's were the past. There was a technical argument behind this. The Merlin's V12 layout presented a frontal area of just 7.5 square feet to the oncoming air. A radial engine, with its cylinders arranged in a star, exposed 13 square feet or more. Less drag meant more speed. For fighters, this mattered. But this argument, valid as it was for single-seat interceptors, became a blanket assumption applied to everything. Bombers, transport aircraft, maritime patrol, roles where reliability, ease of maintenance, and raw power mattered far more than frontal area. The Schneider Trophy had created a gospel, and Roy Fedden was preaching against it alone in a church that did not want to listen. The war came anyway. And when it did, the machine that Roy Fedden had been building in silence became one of the most important weapons Britain had. The Bristol Hercules was the sleeve valve engine brought to life. 14 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, 38.7 litres of displacement, producing between 1150 and 1735 horsepower, depending on the variant. It was enormous, it was complex, and it worked beautifully, brutally, reliably, in conditions that would have destroyed a lesser design. The first aircraft to prove what the Hercules could do was the Bristol Beaufighter. In the autumn of 1940, during the Blitz, German bombers were coming over Britain every night, and the RAF had almost nothing that could stop them in the dark. The Beaufighter changed that. It was the only aircraft in British service with enough power to carry the new airborne interception radar and enough speed to catch a bomber once it found one. Twin Hercules engines gave it the muscle. The radar gave it the eyes. Together, they turned the night sky from a German advantage into a British hunting ground. By the end of the war, Beaufighters had brought down a minimum of 975 enemy aircraft, but the Hercules was just getting started. The short Sterling, the first 4-engine heavy bomber to enter RAF service, flew on Hercules engines in every single variant. All 14,500 of its operational sorties were powered by Fedden's creation. The Handley Page Halifax, the workhorse of Bomber Command, started life with Rolls-Royce Merlins in its early marks, but the most produced version, the Mark III, flew on the Hercules 16. Over 2,090 of those aircraft were built, more than any other Halifax variant. By late 1943, the majority of Halifax bombers rolling off the production lines carried Bristol engines, not Rolls-Royce. The Vickers Wellington, the backbone of Bomber Command in the early war years, told a similar story. Over 11,400 Wellingtons were built in total, and the single most produced variant was the Mark X, powered by the Hercules. 3,803 of them. Even the legendary Lancaster had a Bristol-powered version. The Mark II carried Hercules engines. 300 were built by Armstrong Whitworth. At its peak in March 1944, factories were producing over 2,000 Hercules engines every single month. Over 57,000 were built in total. And when the numbers were added up, somewhere between a quarter and a third of all heavy bomber sorties flown by Bomber Command were carried out by aircraft running on engines designed by one man, the same man the Air Ministry had sidelined, the same man his own board refused to listen to, the same man who had warned them all that this war was coming. Roy Fedden had been right about everything, and his reward was about to be the cruelest thing imaginable. In May 1940, Britain was staring into the abyss. France was falling. The British Expeditionary Force was trapped at Dunkirk. The Luftwaffe outnumbered the RAF in almost every category. And into this chaos stepped one of the most ruthless men in British politics, Lord Beaverbrook. Winston Churchill appointed Beaverbrook as Minister of Aircraft Production with a single mandate: get more planes into the sky by any means necessary. Beaverbrook did not negotiate. He did not consult. He acted. He seized control of the Castle Bromwich factory, which had been failing to produce Spitfires on schedule, and turned it into a production machine. He slashed the number of aircraft types in production down to just 5. The Hurricane, the Spitfire, the Blenheim, the Wellington, and the Whitley. Everything else was secondary. Every resource, every factory hour, every skilled worker was funneled toward those 5 types and the engines that powered them. For Rolls-Royce, this was a golden moment. The Hurricane and the Spitfire both ran on the Merlin, Beaverbrook's emergency made the Merlin the centre of British aviation, and when the Battle of Britain erupted in the summer of 1940, it was Spitfires and Hurricanes that fought it. Not a single Bristol-powered fighter took part in the most famous air battle in history. The Merlin became legend. The myth from the Schneider Trophy was now written in blood and fire over the skies of southern England. Nobody stopped to ask whether this was fair to the radial engine. Nobody cared. Britain was fighting for survival. But Beaverbrook's crisis management had consequences that went far beyond the summer of 1940, and the worst of them fell directly on Roy Fedden. Fedden had been developing something extraordinary, the Bristol Centaurus. 18 cylinders, sleeve valve, over 53 litres of displacement, capable of producing between 2,000 and 3,200 horsepower. It was the most powerful piston engine Britain had ever designed. If completed on schedule, it would have given the RAF an engine in the same class as the American monsters that were already taking shape across the Atlantic. Beaverbrook stopped it. The Centaurus program was suspended, its resources redirected to immediate production needs. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was Napier. The Napier Sabre, a rival engine designed by another company, was in deep trouble. It was unreliable, overheating, and failing in service. Rather than let Napier solve its own problems, the ministry ordered Bristol to help. Fedden was forced to pull his best engineers away from his own project, the Centaurus, and put them to work fixing a competitor's engine. It was an extraordinary humiliation. The finest radial engine team in Britain forced to abandon their own masterpiece to rescue someone else's failure. The Centaurus was delayed by years, and those lost years would cost Britain something it could never recover, its place at the top of piston engine development. But even this was not the final blow. The final blow was personal, and it was coming from inside Bristol itself. In January 1942, the New Year Honours List was published. Among the names, Sir Roy Fedden. Gazetted on the 13th of February, the knighthood was the nation's recognition of everything he had given to the war effort. His engines were powering the bombers that struck Germany every night. His Beaufighters were defending British cities. His Hercules was proving itself to be one of the most reliable engines in the entire conflict. The King himself had acknowledged it. 9 months later, it was over. The White family had been watching Fedden's rising influence with growing unease. He was too ambitious, too loud, too convinced he was right, and now he had a knighthood, a public validation that made him even harder to control. They decided to clip his wings. In the autumn of 1942, Bristol offered Fedden a new role, technical controller. On paper, it sounded reasonable. In reality, it stripped him of almost every meaningful power he had. He would no longer lead the engine department. He would no longer direct research. He would advise, and nothing more. Fedden looked at the offer and called it exactly what it was: an impossible position. A title with no authority, a desk with no purpose. What followed was not a negotiation. It was a slow, ugly collapse. Communication between Fedden and the Bristol board was conducted entirely through lawyers. The Minister of Aircraft Production, Colonel Llewellyn, tried to intervene, recognizing that losing Fedden in the middle of a war was madness. An agreement was reached on the 3rd of September. Fedden withdrew from it the very next day. The terms were unacceptable. The trust was gone. And by then he had already lost the person who mattered most. Leonard Butler, the other half of the FB partnership, the man who had been at Fedden's side for over 20 years, had already left Bristol. The pressure of wartime production, the relentless pace, the political warfare, it had broken him. Butler was gone. The partnership that had stamped its initials on every Bristol engine was finished. But the greatest casualty was not a person. It was an engine. The Bristol Orion, an 18-cylinder radial capable of 4,000 horsepower, had been Leonard Butler's masterwork. It was fully designed. A single-cylinder test rig had already been running in 1942, proving that the concept worked. If completed, the Orion would have been the most powerful piston aero engine Britain had ever produced, rivaling anything the Americans were building. When Fedden was forced out, the Orion program was cancelled, not because it failed, not because the technology was flawed, but because the man who championed it was no longer there to protect it. 4,000 horsepower, gone from the drawing board. A generation of British engine supremacy, erased by a boardroom decision made by men who had never designed anything in their lives. Sir Roy Fedden, Knight of the Realm, creator of engines that powered more than half the RAF, walked out of Bristol in October 1942 with nothing, no laboratory, no team, no factory, no future. The news of Fedden's departure did not stay quiet for long, and when it reached the right ears, it caused an uproar that echoed all the way to the House of Lords. On the 17th of November, 1942, barely a month after Fedden had walked out of Bristol, the matter was raised in Parliament, not in some minor committee. In the House of Lords itself, peers of the realm stood up, one after another, and said what needed to be said. Lord Brabazon, a pioneer of British aviation and one of the most respected voices in the industry, was the first to speak. He told the chamber that Roy Fedden was responsible for more than half of all the power plants currently serving in the Royal Air Force. More than half. He then described what Bristol had done to itself in terms that no one in the room would forget. Removing Fedden from Bristol, Brabazon said, was like running Hamlet Limited without the Prince of Denmark. The company had just removed the very reason it existed. Lord Sempill followed. He pointed out that engines totaling 75 million horsepower had been built to Fedden's designs. 75 million. A number so vast it was almost impossible to comprehend, and every single unit of that power had come from one engineering mind, working in one factory in Bristol. Then came the testimony from across the Atlantic. Dr. Lewis of the United States Advisory Committee on Aeronautics called Fedden the most outstanding air-cooled engine engineer in the world. Not in Britain, in the world. This was not British politeness. This was the American military establishment acknowledging that the man Britain had just discarded was irreplaceable. The debate was extraordinary. Parliament discussing the forced departure of an engineer in the middle of the largest war in human history. It had never happened before. The message from the Lords was clear. This was a catastrophic mistake, and yet nothing changed. The White family held firm. The board did not reverse its decision. The ministry expressed concern but took no action. Fedden was gone, and no amount of parliamentary outrage was going to bring him back. He did not disappear entirely. As chairman of the Royal Aeronautical Society's Advisory Committee, he continued to serve his country in secret, producing 40 classified memorandums between 1941 and 1946 on everything from engine strategy to post-war aviation policy. His mind never stopped working, but he was a general without an army, writing plans that no factory would ever build. The war in Europe ended in May 1945, and almost immediately the man Britain had thrown away became the man Britain needed again. On the 12th of June, just 5 weeks after Germany's surrender, 2 RAF Dakota transport aircraft lifted off from a British airfield carrying a small team of 8 men, their leader, Sir Roy Fedden. Their mission? To inspect the ruins of the German aviation industry before the Soviets, the Americans, or time itself could erase what was left. Over the next 3 weeks, the Fedden mission visited more than 30 facilities across occupied Germany. What they found was staggering. At the Heinkel Works, they examined the HS-011, an advanced jet engine design that was more sophisticated than anything the British had in development. At Junkers, they discovered plans to produce the Jumo 004 jet engine at a rate of 5,000 per month. 5,000. Britain's entire jet engine output at that point was a fraction of that number. At the Vulcanrode Research Centre, hidden in a forest, completely untouched by Allied bombing, they found swept-wing aerodynamic research that was years ahead of anything in Britain or America. At Nordhausen, they walked through the underground tunnels where thousands of forced labourers had assembled V-2 rockets in conditions of unimaginable suffering. But it was in Munich that Fedden found something that shook him to the core. At the BMW facility, his team tested 2 British jet engines, the Derwent 5 and the de Havilland Goblin, using a German high-altitude test chamber known as the Hercules. Fedden's verdict was immediate and blunt. The Hercules was far in advance of any engine testing plant in England or America. Germany had lost the war, but in key areas of engineering it had been ahead all along. Fedden's report drew careful distinctions. German piston engines were weaker in supercharging than British designs, Fedden's own Hercules included, but in fuel injection systems and single-lever engine controls, the Germans were superior. And in aerodynamics and jet propulsion, they were not just ahead, they were a generation ahead. Fedden returned to Britain with a clear and urgent recommendation: recruit as many German scientists and engineers as possible before the other powers took them all. It was the same kind of warning he had given in the 1930s, and the result was the same. Britain brought home roughly 100 German specialists. The United States, through Operation Paperclip, took thousands. The Soviet Union captured between 10 and 15,000. Once again, Fedden had seen the future clearly. Once again, his country chose not to listen. To understand what Britain lost, you need to look across the Atlantic at a country that made the opposite choice. In 1921, the United States Navy issued a decision that would reshape the entire American aviation industry. From that point forward, they declared every aircraft engine built for naval service would be air-cooled. No more liquid-cooled engines, no more radiators, coolant lines, or vulnerable plumbing. If an engine was going to fly over the ocean, from the deck of an aircraft carrier, hundreds of miles from land, it needed to survive salt water, battle damage, and conditions that would destroy a cooling system in minutes. One anonymous naval officer summed up the philosophy in a single line: a water-cooled aircraft engine makes as much sense as an air-cooled submarine. That one decision created an entire ecosystem. Pratt & Whitney, Wright Aeronautical, and other manufacturers competed against each other to build bigger, better, more powerful radials, backed by the full institutional support of the American military. The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, developed engine cowlings that reduced the drag of radial engines by 60%, eliminating the very argument that the Air Ministry had used against Fedden's designs for years. The result was a family of engines that Britain could only dream of. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, producing between 2,000 and 2,800 horsepower. 125,334 were built. It powered the F-4U Corsair, the F-6F Hellcat, and the P-47 Thunderbolt, 3 of the most devastating fighter aircraft of the Second World War. Behind it came the Wright R-3350 and the Pratt & Whitney R-4360, engines of staggering power that carried American aviation into the post-war era. Britain had nothing that could match them. The Hercules, magnificent as it was, topped out at 1,735 horsepower, a class below. The Centaurus could have competed with its 3,200 horsepower potential, but it arrived too late, delayed by Beaverbrook's decisions and the chaos that followed Fedden's departure. The Orion, the 4,000 horsepower monster that could have surpassed even the American giants, never left the drawing board. And this was the critical difference. In America, the radial engine had an institutional champion, the United States Navy. It had multiple competing manufacturers driving innovation. It had government-funded research solving aerodynamic problems. It was a system. In Britain, the radial engine had Roy Fedden, one man, fighting his own board of directors, ignored by the Air Ministry, sidelined by the Merlin myth, and ultimately thrown out by the company he had built. One man against a system that did not want him, instead of a system built to support what he was trying to do. That is the price Britain paid, not because its engineer was inferior, but because it never built the system that its engineer deserved. After Bristol, Roy Fedden tried to start again. In 1945, he founded his own company, Roy Fedden Limited. He designed a sleeve valve flat six engine and an experimental radial for automobiles, trying to bring the technology he had mastered in aviation into a new industry. It was an ambitious idea. Take the principles of lightweight, high compression design that had powered bombers at 30,000 feet and put them into the cars and trucks that post-war Britain desperately needed. But the timing was wrong. Post-war Britain had no appetite for radical engine designs in cars. The country was exhausted, broke, and focused on rebuilding with what it already had. Investors were cautious. Orders never came. The company was liquidated in 1947. Another door closed. Another Fedden vision rejected, not because it was wrong, but because no one had the courage to back it. But Fedden's greatest legacy was never going to be a product. It was going to be an institution. In October 1946, the College of Aeronautics opened at Cranfield in Bedfordshire. Fedden had chaired the committee that designed the entire institution, its curriculum, its research priorities, its philosophy of engineering education. He poured into Cranfield everything he had learned in 40 years of building engines. That engineering was not just about clever designs on paper, but about testing, failing, iterating, and refusing to accept that something could not be done. He understood, perhaps better than anyone in Britain, that the future of aviation would depend not just on machines, but on the people trained to imagine and build them. Today, Cranfield University is one of the world's leading aerospace and engineering institutions. Graduates of Cranfield have worked on everything from jet engines to spacecraft, from Formula One cars to satellites. Every student who walks through its doors is walking through a building that exists because Roy Fedden believed Britain's future depended on training the next generation of engineers. It is his most enduring creation. And unlike the Orion, no board of directors could ever cancel it. He did not stop working. He served as aeronautical advisor to NATO from 1952 to 1953, advising the Western Alliance on the very kind of aviation strategy he had spent decades trying to get his own country to adopt. He consulted for the Doughty Group from 1953 to 1960, lending his expertise to landing gear and hydraulic systems. He returned to Cranfield to teach, standing in front of classrooms, passing on what he knew to young engineers who had no idea they were learning from one of the most important figures in aviation history. He gave lectures, he wrote papers, he attended meetings of the Royal Aeronautical Society, the institution that had elected him president 3 times. He never stopped thinking about engines. He never stopped believing that Britain could lead the world in aerospace, if only it had the will. And one of his engines had the last word after all, the Bristol Centaurus, the engine that Beaverbrook had delayed, that the White family had orphaned, that the ministry had forced to wait while Fedden's engineers rescued someone else's failure, eventually made it into production. It powered the Hawker Sea Fury, a ferocious naval fighter that would become the fastest serial production piston engine fighter ever used in combat. During the Korean War, a Royal Navy Sea Fury pilot even managed to bring down a MiG-15 jet, a piston-powered aircraft outfighting a jet in the skies over Korea. The Centaurus had arrived years behind schedule, but when it finally arrived, it proved everything Fedden had ever promised. Every horsepower, every claim, every argument he had made to the men who refused to listen. The engine they tried to stop turned out to be the best of its kind ever built. The Hercules, too, refused to be forgotten. Long after the war ended, it continued to power civilian airliners across the world, carrying passengers where it had once carried bombs. The Bristol freighter, the Vickers Varsity, the Handley Page Hastings, all flew on Hercules engines, reliable, powerful and enduring, just as Fedden had designed them to be. Decades of peacetime service, millions of miles flown, an engine that outlasted the men who tried to bury its creator and the politics that had tried to destroy him. In 1969, the Royal Aeronautical Society recorded an interview with Sir Roy Fedden. By then he was 84 years old, still sharp, still passionate, still carrying the fire that had driven him since he first walked into a factory in Bristol at the age of 21. His voice, the voice of the man who had built engines totaling 75 million horsepower, who had warned Britain about Germany before anyone would listen, who had been knighted and discarded in the same year, who had walked through the ruins of the 1,000-year Reich and told his country what was coming next, was preserved in their archive. It is still there today. A quiet recording of an old man sitting in a room somewhere in England, remembering a life spent fighting for things that mattered more than glory or recognition. Roy Fedden passed away on the 21st of November 1973 at Buckland Old Mill in Brecon, Wales. He was 88 years old. There was no state funeral, no national monument, no statue in Whitehall, no Hollywood film. The newspapers gave him a few modest paragraphs, a brief obituary for a man whose engines had shaken the skies over 3 continents. The world that his creations had helped to save barely noticed he was gone, and within a generation his name had all but disappeared from public memory. Today, if you ask anyone about the engine that won the Second World War, they will say the Merlin, Rolls-Royce, the Spitfire, the Legend. But legends are not always the whole truth. The truth is that another engine, designed by a man from Bristol who was too stubborn to quit and too brilliant to ignore, lifted more bombers, carried more ordnance, and flew more combat missions over Germany than the Merlin ever could. The truth is that the Bristol Hercules and the 4 engines that came before it were the work of one extraordinary mind, a mind that his own country never quite knew how to value. 57,000 Hercules engines, 75 million horsepower, 262 aircraft types on the Jupiter alone, the Centaurus that outran a jet, and a university that still teaches young engineers to build what others say cannot be built. All of it, every cylinder, every sleeve valve, every horsepower, traces back to one man who walked into a Bristol factory before the First World War and never stopped building until they forced him to stop. Roy Fedden built the engines that carried the war to the enemy, and for that they showed him the door. Remember his name.